Roy Meatball McAllister walked into the dingy alien repair shop, his droid, D1XY, malfunctioning behind him. The pleasure bot, which he insisted was only for companionship, had been glitching for days. Sparks shot out from its chest plate as it stumbled through the doorway, its voice looping in an endless cycle of awkward compliments. Roy sighed, wishing he could just leave the damn thing behind, but he needed it, if only for its supposed conversation skills. Just stay quiet, D1X. No funny business, Roy muttered, though he was certain the droid couldn't hear him through its endless glitches. The shop had a musty smell, like a mix of burnt circuitry and unidentifiable alien food. Shelves were cluttered with bizarre tools, some vibrating ominously. Behind the counter was Blorvax, the mechanic. A four-eyed, six-armed slug who looked like he could have been an ancient relic from some forgotten planet. His slimy skin shimmered in the dim light, and he gurgled when he spoke. "You come for repairs, yes?" Blorvax's voice was both soothing and disconcerting. "Yeah, my droid's having some issues," Roy said, leaning on the counter. "It's supposed to keep things interesting, but right now it's more distracting than anything." Blorvax turned his beady eyes toward D1XY, who was now trying to seductively wave its malfunctioning arm in a slow arc. Sparks flew from its joints, a few small flames flickering in the process. Blorvax squinted at the droid, his lips, if you could call them that, pursed in thought. "Ah. Not the droid that needs fixing, my friend. It is you who need repair." Roy frowned. "What?" "Your software is outdated," Blorvax said, waving a tentacle in front of Roy's face. "Rusting chassis. Leaking coolant system. You are walking scrap metal. How are you even functioning?" He paused for effect, clearly enjoying the shock on Roy's face. "I'm perfectly fine," Roy snapped. He stood taller, puffing his chest out as if to prove a point. "I'm a damn ace pilot, Blorvax. I don't need some alien mechanic telling me how to live my life. I just want you to fix it." Roy gestured at the malfunctioning droid. Blorvax's many eyes gleamed with amusement. No. Fixing droid is simple. Fixing you, that is the challenge." He snapped his fingers, and a wrench appeared in one of his slimy hands, which he used to poke Roy's chest. "Let's start with your emotional software. No wonder you cannot keep a woman around." Roy flinched. His mind flashed back to the long list of ex-girlfriends, each one less tolerant of his emotional immaturity. His last relationship had ended because he was too emotionally unavailable, whatever that meant. But this was ridiculous. "I'm good, all right? I don't need to be fixed emotionally. I'm just fine as I am," Roy said defensively. I'm just not good with feelings, okay?" Blorvax let out a laugh that sounded like a wheeze. "You have the emotional range of a wet sponge." He slapped Roy's shoulder, his six arms moving in such a flurry that Roy didn't even know where to look. "Time for an emotional firmware update. You are not functioning optimally." Roy barely had time to react before Blorvax went to work, humming and muttering to himself in his alien tongue. A strange device appeared in the mechanic's hands, a long silver tube with glowing, pulsating symbols along its length. He jammed it against Roy's chest, and Roy felt a strange electrical pulse course through his body. The feeling was oddly, not unpleasant. It was like the flood of thoughts and emotions inside him suddenly quieted, leaving him strangely calm. "See? Now we are making progress," Blorvax said, nodding approvingly. "You must allow the feelings to come. You cannot avoid them forever." "I don't," Roy started, but the words caught in his throat. What had just happened? He never felt this clear-headed before. It was like his emotional fog had cleared. Blorvax didn't let up. "Next, we will rebalance your spinal column. There is nothing more pathetic than a man who slouches." Before Roy could protest, Blorvax moved behind him and clamped a series of mechanical tentacles onto his shoulders, stretching him in ways he didn't think were possible. His spine cracked several times, and a groan escaped his lips. Was that pleasure? "Better, yes?" Blorvax asked, pulling back with a look of satisfaction on his slimy face. You are now standing like a true man. No more slouching. No more looking like a sad sack of meat. Roy's jaw hung open. He felt better. His posture was straighter, his muscles felt firmer. Hell, he even had more energy. And to his horror, he noticed his reflection in the droid's shiny plating. His jawline looked sharper, his shoulders broader. Okay, this is weird, Roy muttered, looking himself up and down. How am I feeling like this? Blorvax ignored him and moved to the final part of his plan. Now we move on to your most important system. The coolant system. Roy raised an eyebrow. I didn't think I had a coolant system. Oh, you do, Blorvax said with a smile that sent a chill down Roy's spine. You have one meatball. And we are going to make it perfect. With that, Blorvax hooked up a strange contraption to Roy's neck, a cooling system that hummed with strange, alien energy. The sensation was like a cool breeze washing over him, but it spread throughout his entire body. The feeling of heat, stress, and tension that Roy hadn't even realized he was carrying just melted away. Roy blinked. His head was clearer. His body? Stronger. More alive. He had no idea what just happened, but it was like he'd been living in a haze and now had perfect clarity. Blorvax stood back and looked at his handiwork, nodding slowly. There. All better. You are now the pinnacle of manhood. Emotionally mature. Physically optimized. And dare I say, irresistible. He gave Roy a thumbs up with one of his many arms. Roy stared at him in disbelief. Are you serious? You've upgraded me? His mind raced. He didn't know whether to be angry, embarrassed, or excited. I told you, Blorvax said with a smug grin. You needed fixing. Now go, enjoy your new self. Roy turned toward the door, trying to gather his thoughts, but all he could think of was how different he felt. Stronger. Better. Maybe perfect. But what the hell did that mean for his life now? Roy stood in the middle of the dingy alien repair shop, his heart pounding. What had just happened to him? He ran his hand over his jawline, now more defined than before, his muscles rippling beneath the fabric of his jacket. He was sure Blorvax had done something, but he couldn't quite figure out what. Everything about him felt different, almost like he had just been reprogrammed. As he made his way to the door, he couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in how he walked. It wasn't just his posture, it was like his entire body had been recalibrated, refined. As he stepped outside into the hot, sweltering air of the planet's surface, he felt like a different man, more confident, more alive. A smug grin crept onto his face. This was it. The upgrade was real. I'm not the same guy anymore. He didn't know whether to laugh or be scared. In all his years as an ace pilot, this was the strangest experience he'd ever had. But before he could wrap his head around it, something unusual happened. He felt a shift in the air. Was someone watching him? Sure enough, he turned to find a group of women strolling down the street. They were giving him looks, no stares, with eyes that lingered longer than what felt normal. Roy felt his chest puff out involuntarily. It was as if every inch of his body was magnetized. The air felt charged, and all he could think was, what the hell is going on? As the women passed, one of them, an attractive woman with long, dark hair, slowed her pace and gave him an appreciative once-over. She licked her lips. Roy raised an eyebrow. Is she checking me out? He smirked, feeling the sudden confidence surge through him like an electric current. You got a problem? He said, his voice smoother, deeper than he remembered. His words were dripping with charm, yet they came out effortlessly. The woman grinned back, her eyes now flashing a playful glint. No problem at all, she replied, leaning in slightly. You just look different. Mind if I join you for a drink? Roy felt the heat rise in his cheeks, but the thrill of the moment was undeniable. He didn't know what had changed about him, but clearly, something big had. I think I could use some company, he said, winking. Let's go somewhere quiet. The woman didn't hesitate. Lead the way, she said, following him with the kind of interest he hadn't seen since his younger days, but now it was amplified, intense and eager. They made their way to a nearby bar, where Roy found himself ordering drinks like he'd done it 1,000 times before. But now, everything felt sharper, more instinctual. He wasn't just living anymore, he was thriving. By the time they reached their booth, the woman was all over him, her hands finding their way onto his arm as she slid into the seat next to him. She leaned in close, her breath hot against his ear. "You know, I don't usually approach strangers," she whispered, her lips brushing against his skin. "But there's just something about you tonight." Roy smiled, the words rolling off his tongue with ease. "Well, lucky for you, I'm not a stranger anymore." He made sure to hold eye contact, noticing how her pupils dilated as she leaned in further. But just as Roy thought he was about to seal the deal, the door of the bar slammed open. His heart sank. He recognized the woman who had entered, the one who used to be his ex-girlfriend, Carla. The last person he wanted to run into. She locked eyes with him, her expression immediately turning into one of pure fury. "Roy!" she yelled, striding over to him with purpose. "I can't believe I'm seeing you here. After everything you put me through, you're just sitting there like nothing happened?" Roy's stomach twisted. The woman he was with leaned back, clearly not understanding the sudden tension that had settled in the air. "Carla," Roy muttered, trying to salvage some level of dignity. "What are you doing here?" Carla shot him a death glare. "What am I doing here? What the hell are you doing here with her?" She gestured to the woman sitting next to him, clearly jealous, though Roy wasn't sure why. Carla had ended their relationship in the most dramatic way possible. The woman beside Roy raised an eyebrow, not backing down. "What's your problem?" Carla crossed her arms. "Oh, I see. So, now you're the perfect man? After everything that happened between us, you're just going to go around acting like the ideal boyfriend?" Roy felt the weight of her words, but something inside him snapped. He wasn't the same guy anymore, he was better. He had been upgraded. Carla had always complained that he wasn't emotionally available enough, that he didn't know how to handle her feelings. But now, he knew exactly what to say, exactly how to handle this situation. "I don't know what your problem is, Carla," Roy said, his tone cool and controlled. "But let me be clear, I've changed. I'm a better version of myself, and maybe that's why you're so mad." Carla gaped at him. "Changed? Yeah, you sure have changed. You look perfect now, Roy. And it makes me sick. Where the hell was this version of you when we were together?" Roy grinned, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and confusion. "Guess I needed a little upgrade. But it's too late now." He shot a glance at the woman next to him, who was looking between the two of them with confusion written all over her face. Carla, still fuming, pointed at him with a finger that trembled with fury. "You know, I think I know exactly what happened. You didn't just fix yourself, did you? You had help." She eyed him suspiciously. "I bet you went to that mechanic, didn't you? Blorvax, that creep." Roy's grin widened. "Guess I did. And it was totally worth it." Carla's face turned red with rage. "Well, good for you, Roy. But I'm not done with you. You can't just get fixed and expect me to just let it go." With that, she stormed out of the bar, leaving Roy to wonder if the changes to him would come with consequences he hadn't quite anticipated. The woman sitting next to him didn't say a word, but the look she gave him now was filled with understanding. She didn't care about Carla. She was only interested in the new, improved Roy. Roy leaned back in his seat, feeling an odd sense of power. But beneath the excitement, something gnawed at him. This new version of himself was everything he had wanted to be, but now that he had it, was it really what he needed? The thought lingered as the night stretched on, filled with laughter, flirtation, and the realization that Roy McAllister's life would never be the same. But the question remained, would he be able to handle all these new changes? Or would his past come crashing down on him with a vengeance? Roy had never felt this alive before. The transformation Blorvax had performed on him was beyond anything he could have imagined. He moved through life with the precision and grace of a man who had his shit together, something he'd never experienced before. Every step, every glance, felt intentional. His confidence, which had once been a patchwork of insecurity and bravado, now radiated from him effortlessly. Women noticed it, and so did men. He wasn't sure if it was the sheer force of his newfound self-assurance or something more subtle, but whatever it was undeniable. But the world around him wasn't prepared for the new Roy. He wasn't just a pilot anymore. He was a man who had it all figured out, emotionally, physically, and sexually. And it was terrifying. He'd never been the type to take relationships seriously. They were a means to an end, fun, but nothing more. But now, with every woman who glanced at him, every flirtatious remark, he found himself torn between enjoying the attention and feeling like he was being sold a version of himself he didn't quite recognize. The bar was a familiar haunt, but now it seemed different. He wasn't just the guy sitting at the corner, sipping his drink while playing the field. He was the guy who owned the room. Conversations flowed around him, but he didn't have to engage unless he wanted to. And when he did speak, it felt like the world was listening. But it wasn't just the women that were drawn to him. As he made his way through the crowded space, he noticed men looking at him, some with envy, others with admiration. The strange thing was, he didn't even care. The old Roy would have basked in the attention, lapped it up like a dog in a sunbeam. But this new version? He simply didn't need it. He was beyond that now. However, the more he soaked in this new reality, the more he realized how messed up it all was. He didn't recognize the man in the mirror. Sure, he had a chiseled jawline now, a body that even the most trained soldier would envy, and a mental clarity that was unsettling. But when he looked deeper, he saw someone who had been changed, remade into something he wasn't sure he liked. Was this really him, or was it the product of a slug mechanic who had, in his words, optimized him? The more Roy thought about it, the more questions arose. But just as quickly as the questions emerged, they were drowned by the attention of yet another woman. She approached him, a confident smile on her lips, her body language radiating desire. God, this was too easy, Roy thought, his inner cynic rising up. But instead of recoiling or shying away, he leaned into it. He was no longer the unsure, emotionally distant pilot. He was this version. And this version of him was exactly what women wanted. At least, that's what it seemed like. But then, as the night wore on, something unexpected happened. He heard the familiar sound of a voice he dreaded. It was Carla. She was back. He had thought he'd seen the last of her, but apparently, his ex wasn't done with him. She stormed into the bar, her eyes locked on him with a fire that could only mean one thing: she wasn't here to congratulate him for his improvements. Before Roy could make a move, Carla was already on her way to him. She didn't even acknowledge the woman sitting next to him. She was laser-focused, her eyes filled with venom. "You think you're all that now, don't you, Roy?" she spat, standing just a few feet away from him. The crowd around them seemed to hold their breath. Roy didn't feel the old pang of guilt he'd usually have when Carla came around. No, this time, he was different. He had been fixed. He had been made better. So, instead of shrinking back, he met her gaze with steady confidence. "Carla, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice smooth and unbothered. "You don't look so happy to see me." Her nostrils flared. "Oh, I'm not happy at all. You think this version of you is going to win me back? Just because you're all shiny and new now?" Roy raised an eyebrow. "You never gave me a chance before," he said, his voice low, but with an undeniable edge of finality. "I was never good enough for you, Carla. But I'm not that guy anymore. So, if you're looking for an apology, you're in the wrong place." Carla's face twisted with rage. "You think this is funny, Roy? You think you can just waltz around with this perfect, emotionally mature version of yourself and I'm supposed to just forget everything?" Roy chuckled, though it wasn't a light-hearted laugh. "You don't get it, do you, Carla? You didn't want me when I was broken. Now that I'm fixed, you can't stand it. The words hit her like a slap in the face. She flinched, but instead of backing down, she stepped closer. I'm not done with you, she hissed. You don't get to just walk away, Roy. Not when you've been messing with me like this. You owe me. Roy felt his new confidence solidify, his grip on the situation tightening. I don't owe you anything. I'm not the same guy who hurt you, and you don't get to hold that over me. You can't manipulate me anymore. Carla's eyes burned with fury as she turned on her heel, storming out of the bar without another word. Roy watched her leave, his heart oddly empty. He'd won this battle, sure, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. This new version of him might have won over the room, but it had also cost him something, a piece of himself. The woman who had been sitting next to him shifted uncomfortably, her earlier enthusiasm now muted. Well, she said, trying to sound casual. That was intense. Roy laughed bitterly. Yeah, tell me about it. He turned to face her fully, but before he could say anything, the door to the bar swung open again. This time, it wasn't Carla. It was someone else, another one of his exes, someone he hadn't seen in years. She was smiling, walking confidently toward him, and Roy felt his stomach drop. There was no escaping the consequences of his upgrade. His past was catching up to him faster than he could keep up. As she drew closer, Roy's thoughts raced. How many more of his exes would come to claim him? How many would demand answers, satisfaction, or revenge for the man he had been? He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing. This new version of him might have been the perfect man, but he was about to find out that perfection came with a price. Roy's head was spinning. Every step he took seemed like it led to another confrontation, another ex, and yet another awkward encounter. Just when he thought he had gotten the upper hand, the door would swing open, and there would be another face from his past. The woman who walked in this time was none other than Jessica, his first serious girlfriend. The one who had spent years trying to mold him into someone he wasn't. The one he had ghosted without so much as a text. And now here she was, strolling into the bar like she owned the place, her eyes locked on him. It felt like a punch to the gut. The old Roy, the one who never had to deal with his emotions, the one who could run away from anything, would have brushed it off. He'd have kept drinking, laughed at her expense, and then walked away. But this new Roy, the emotionally stable, emotionally mature version. He couldn't look at Jessica without feeling a twinge of guilt. And that was strange. Roy, she said, her voice smooth like honey, but there was an edge beneath it. It's been a while. He smiled, but it wasn't his usual grin. It felt forced. Yeah, a while, he muttered, taking a sip of his drink to hide his discomfort. What's up? Don't act like you don't know why I'm here. Her tone shifted from sweet to sharp in an instant. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. Not after the way you disappeared without a word. You really think you can just walk back into my life after all this time? The old Roy would have cracked a joke, deflected, and distracted her with charm. He would have skirted the issue, avoided it like the plague. But this Roy, the new Roy, had to confront it. And damn, it felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. I'm sorry, Jessica. I was an idiot back then. I was selfish, and I didn't know how to deal with things, or with you, he said, his voice strangely steady. His eyes locked with hers, and for the first time in a long while, he was being real. I never should have done that to you. You deserve better. Jessica's expression softened, but there was still a lingering bitterness in her eyes. She crossed her arms. Well, look at you. The perfect man now, huh? The man who's grown up and seen the light? Is that what you think this is? Roy's stomach churned. He hadn't meant it like that. I'm not perfect, Jess. I've just changed. I don't know what else to say. The awkward silence stretched between them, and Roy could feel the eyes of everyone in the bar on him. Every glance from a bystander, every whisper, it all felt like it was crushing him. This wasn't the easy confidence he'd come to expect. No, this was the weight of his past finally catching up with him, and it was suffocating. Jessica's gaze softened, but only slightly. "You know, it's funny," she said, leaning in slightly. "I used to beg you to talk to me, to open up, and now here you are, all emotional and sincere. But you couldn't do that when I needed you, could you? You ran away." Roy swallowed hard, guilt washing over him. "I'm not running anymore," he muttered barely above a whisper. "Well, good for you." Jessica smiled bitterly. "But I'm not interested in the new you, Roy. I wanted the man I was with before. The one who didn't ignore me, who didn't act like he couldn't care less about me. I wanted that, Roy." His chest tightened. The sting of her words wasn't something he had expected. He had thought that becoming this new version of himself would fix everything, that it would solve the problems of his past. But here it was, slapping him in the face. He wasn't the man she wanted. He was a stranger to her now, and no amount of emotional maturity would change that. It wasn't enough. Before he could respond, Jessica turned on her heel and walked away, leaving him standing there with a sinking feeling in his gut. He watched her leave, his mind swirling in confusion. Was this all a joke? Had the overhaul actually made things worse? He wasn't sure anymore. The women who had been hanging around him all night seemed to have lost interest in the spectacle. No one was interested in a man who had emotional baggage or who was emotionally mature enough to face his own past. They wanted someone who was exciting, unpredictable. And for the first time, Roy realized that maybe his emotional upgrade wasn't a blessing after all. As he slumped back in his chair, staring down at his drink, he felt the sting of realization. The new version of him, the one who was emotionally stable and physically flawless, might have been perfect for the world, but it didn't fix everything. In fact, it only seemed to highlight the things he couldn't change. He couldn't undo the mistakes of his past, no matter how perfect his exterior was now. Roy could hear laughter from across the room, voices carrying the carefree energy of people who had no baggage, no regrets, no unfinished business. It was a stark contrast to his own situation. He felt alone, despite the crowds around him. Was this the price of perfection? To be emotionally mature but alienated from the people who had once known you. And then, just as he thought things couldn't get any worse, another ex entered the bar. This time, it was Lydia. She was the one who had been waiting for him to settle down. The one who had always believed that love could fix everything. She locked eyes with him as she entered, her smile wide, a knowing look in her eyes. Roy felt his heart skip a beat. He hadn't seen Lydia in years, and seeing her again was like a blast from the past. And like all the others, she wasn't going to just let him off easy. She had something to say, something to demand. His stomach sank as she made her way toward him. He could already feel the tension building, and for the first time, he wasn't sure he was ready for whatever came next.